Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're going to be starting Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8 today. So just to give a brief summary of what happened before, we've heard we heard how Ashwatthama killed the sons of the Pandavas. And now, after Arjuna had to hear what seemed like conflicting advice on how Ashwatthama should be reprimanded, he finally was able to come up with a solution that fit both sides of the dilemma. So he essentially dishonored Ashwatthama by cutting off the jewel from his head and also his hair. And it's described how this dishonor for a Kshatriya is worse than death. So now we will be starting chapter 8. And just to, before I start reading, just to give a brief preview of what we will be going into here. So now the Pandavas will complete the rituals that are to be performed after the war has ended for those that have died. And then actually Ashwatthama will attack again. He sends a Brahmastra for Uttara, because Uttara is pregnant with Parikshit Maharaj, actually. And so then she runs to Krishna for protection, and he provides his protection. And then we get to hear the prayers of Queen Kunti. So that's just a very, very brief summary of the section that we're going into. So I will read, we'll just be covering texts 1 and 2 today. So text 1. Sutta uvacha atate samparetanam swanam udakam ichatam datum sakrishna gangayam puraskritya yayustriya. Translation. Sutta Goswami said, thereafter, the Pandavas, desiring to deliver water to the dead relatives who had desired it, went to the Ganges with Draupadi. The ladies walked in front. Purport. To date, it is the custom in Hindu society to go to the Ganges or any other sacred river to take bath when death occurs in the family. Each of the family members pours out a potful of the Ganges water for the departed soul and walks in a procession with the ladies in the front. The Pandavas also followed the rules more than 5,000 years ago. Lord Krishna, being a cousin of the Pandavas, was also amongst the family members. And the next verse. Te niniyodakam sarve vilapya cha brisham puna apluta haripadabja rajaputa sarij jale. Translation. Having lamented over them and sufficiently offered Ganges water, they bathed in the Ganges, whose water is sanctified, due to being mixed with the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnanandjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, as you can see, these verses are very straightforward. The Pandavas are going to honor those who have died in the war, and so they are offering to the Ganges as a ritual that happens after souls depart. And Prabhupada explains in the purport just how this is a custom that still goes on today in Hindu society. Of course, because the Ganges is considered a sacred river emanating from the feet of the Lord himself, so the lotus feet of Krishna. So this is still a custom that goes on today, and I don't really have anything much else to add to this. The only thing that I would say is that reading about this kind of this ritual that takes place at the time of death, and also there are many different such rituals that take place at different points in life. There are different types of milestones that we reach in our lives. And the Vedic system is set up in such a way that each different type of milestone is usually accompanied by a ritual. And this is actually really a wonderful practice, because each one of these rituals is an opportunity to recall our, you could say, like, our intention for that aspect of our lives to Krishna. I remember Romapad Swami was speaking at, for those of you that know Sham Saki from Chicago, she's one of our generation of youth here in Chicago, and she was having the I forget Simanto Nayana, or the ceremony before the baby is born. And so she was about to give birth to Gopal, her son, and Maharaj was speaking on the topic of how, in one sense, these rituals actually aren't necessary, because especially as devotees of Krishna, we can, the benefit of all such rituals is accomplished simply by worshiping Krishna. But that doesn't mean that these rituals can't be done. But the idea is that in doing these rituals, whether it be, all of the different ceremonies that are around birth, there are ceremonies for hair cutting, there's ceremonies for the first learning, for the first beginning of education, for marriage, for having children, and then we're reading here for the departed souls. All of these ceremonies are an opportunity for an aspiring devotee to remember Krishna again. So, and of course the Pandavas are here with Krishna himself, so it can't get better than that. So that was just one point that I was thinking about as far as rituals. And the second thing that I wanted to mention was that it's just interesting to point out here that the Pandavas are grieving at all. Even considering, even later on in this chapter, it seems that, the Pandavas are completing their grieving process here. But then again, at the end of this chapter, Yudhishthira Maharaj is he's still overwhelmed with what he considers to be an atrocity, having killed so many of his family members. And he feels so disturbed himself still. And then in the following chapter, he will hear advice from Bhishma, their grandfather. So, but these are the Pandavas who are pure devotees of the Lord. So it in one sense, it could be considered maybe confusing. Why are pure devotees of the Lord grieving, even if it's, family members? And we do hear examples where pure devotees of the Lord do not grieve. An example that I think of is in Lord Chaitanya's Leela, when he was performing the kirtans in the night at Srivas Thakur's house. One day, one of these days, Srivas Thakur's son had been sick, and he actually ends up dying while Lord Chaitanya's kirtan is going on. But Srivas Thakur actually withholds his family and anybody that is aware of the death of the son. He completely prevents them from reporting that information to Lord Chaitanya, or actually disseminating that at all, because he didn't want to disturb the ecstasy of Lord Chaitanya's kirtan. And of course, Lord Chaitanya ends up realizing that something has happened anyway. But this was a very bewildering example of a devotee who his own son passes away and he doesn't lose his composure. But we are also seeing the opposite here, where these devotees, the Pandavas, are losing their composure. They are grieving over the death of the departed souls. And so what, I would like to hear if anybody has any other comments on this as well. But what this says to me is that even pure devotees of the Lord still, they still have this compassion in their heart that, we can call it makes them human, and so even in our aspiration for higher, forms of devotion to Krishna, it doesn't mean that we lose our humanity, and it doesn't mean that we lose our compassion and care for those that are close to us. So I just felt that was a good point to highlight, because otherwise, a pure devotee is completely detached, and we do see that in many instances. So these were the couple points that I wanted to share in this section. So if anybody has any comments or questions, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mukunda.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, I think, you are absolutely right. The main purpose is to please Krishna, and sometimes pure devotees, they do, when there is a higher purpose, they can, for example, in Srivas Thakur's example, he did not want to disturb Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's kirtan. But then we know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to know, and what he did show compassion towards him.
Right.
And he came to know. So my understanding is that as we grow in devotional service, the heart becomes more softer. Not showing compassion is like a hard heart. And the way I understand is that they do show compassion and feelings, because they can understand the feelings of others, even though they may not, because the other side, they may not understand the concept of soul passing and the feelings that they are going through. So it's a way of like connecting with them, or being in normal terms, being realistic.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's also very interesting to me that, if we're considering, in this case, the Pandavas' relatives who passed away, if a normal person who's not a devotee is there grieving, then their grievance may look externally the same as that of the Pandavas, who are pure devotees. So that can be that's interesting. But the quality of a pure devotee's compassion is different than the quality of a non-devotee's compassion, even if externally it may look the same. So, thank you for sharing. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's a gulf of difference between the compassion, and even externally, I think the manifestation is different. If we can understand.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have anything else to share?
Hare Krishna, Mukunda Prabhu. Thank you so much for bringing that those 2 points, which I felt very practical for us. Regarding these rituals, I was thinking yesterday also, Mohan Lila Prabhu was bringing this point. It's not that we just reject them because saying, for devotees, we don't have to go through. But, I was thinking of what we are learning in our Nectar of Devotion Bhakti Shastri class, how, for a person who is like really up there, it doesn't, they don't have to. But at our level, I was appreciating you bringing that Shamsaki Srimantonaina Samskara, or like other, the marriage samskaras that we see in our community. It just brings so much of that, connection much deeper to Krishna. And I was just thinking, even externally, if we see, we'll have these Maharaj or like very senior sannyasis connecting us through the sound vibration and the whole, the samskara and the sacrifice. It is auspicious and potent, but especially if we are having Krishna as a goal for that, and to help the soul in for Simantonaina. So it definitely has so much more impetus for us to take deeper shelter and have deeper connection. So my appreciation for that actually increased by as you were sharing this. Otherwise I was like, yeah, that's fine, we don't have to go through kind of a thought process.
Right.
It's really very nice that you brought it up. So it actually helped me so much.
Thank you.
The other point, thank you, Prabhu. The other point about the grief, I was remembering, all Prabhupada disciples pouring their heart when His Holiness Bhaktacharya Maharaj's departure. It's just so moving, on one hand we say, okay, they all know he's a super soul and they know that he has actually gone back to, serve Srila Prabhupada. So it is in a way, maybe bringing that joy or whatever, but definitely, losing that association and that person in that relationship, at least for the time being now, the way they're pouring their heart, it's just so heart moving. And that brought me to this, the soft heartedness. Different devotees may express in different ways, but definitely I think we can actually have that glimpse of their softness, which is way beyond we can even imagine, like how much it is. So it's just thinking, even these Pandavas, yes, they have these 5 sons and Abhimanyu, but they're not only grieving for them, they're actually grieving for all the people who have died. And these are the people, like, enemies, and they try to kill them so many times. But in spite of that, that genuine compassion, and then that, the care for the other living entities, that was really, really touching. As you mentioned, we hear about Yudhishthir Maharaj's thing. It's just so deeply moving. And I was appreciating Bhagavatam, bringing us to that perspective. It's not just become hard-hearted and don't care for anyone, but become more and more soft-hearted.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many examples in the Bhagavatam of devotees grieving both at the disappearance of maybe other devotees or at the disappearance of Krishna himself, and it's very moving. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Mukunda, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I was curious with the grieving process, maybe if you could provide a word of advice. I have one of those situations in the family, my mother grieving over her mother, and I was curious maybe if you could maybe share how devotees would maybe help an individual who has difficulty with such a situation, and also if they do not necessarily have religious or spiritual tendencies. Might be a challenging question, but I appreciate any advice.
That's a really, really good question. It is challenging. One thing that comes to mind is that the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita talks, one of the most fundamental messages in the Bhagavad Gita is that you are the soul, you are not this body. And one thing that we learn as devotees is that while that may be the case, it's especially at the time of, the departure of a soul, especially a family member, it may not be appropriate to, you could say, kind of throw that in someone's face and be like, well, they were the soul, they're not this body. So like you pointed out, especially if someone is not inclined towards the philosophy, it may not be appropriate to try to throw the philosophy at them. But and I would like to hear if anybody, I know many devotees here would have other advice, would have more advice to give than myself. But one thing that I think of is that for one, the value of chanting Hare Krishna cannot be underplayed. And so sometimes I've heard stories where family members will ask their relatives who are grieving to just chant Hare Krishna. You can explain that this is a mantra that this is the names of God, and this is a mantra that can be chanted for the welfare of the departed soul. And we have the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra accompanying any major ceremony that we do in our lives. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is always present because it's the most auspicious and the most powerful mantra for this age. So even a family member who may not have inclination towards the philosophy can appreciate that, okay, this is, these are names of God, it's universal, and we can chant for the benefit of the departed soul. And people usually can resonate with that. And I'm even also just thinking of an example, this is a side point, but sometimes it's very interesting, but sometimes even someone who's not inclined towards the philosophy, you would be surprised that these what may be considered to be a very kind of straightforward message of the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes that resonates with people. I just heard recently an example of a friend who his father had passed away. A friend of a friend their father had passed away, and this person is not religious at all, but suddenly he got the inspiration after his father had passed away to reach out to a colleague of his that he knew was, a devotee, a person that reads Bhagavad Gita, because this person was aware that Bhagavad Gita talks about, what happens at the time of death to the soul and everything. And interestingly, this, by hearing the descriptions of the Bhagavad Gita, it was very consoling. So that may not always be the case, especially when it's fresh, but this is just a couple of things that come to mind. Sometimes the message of the Bhagavad Gita can be very pertinent at that moment. Sometimes it's just good enough to chant Hare Krishna. So I don't know if anybody would like to add anything to that, any other advice, or if you would have any other follow-up questions or comments on that, but that's a very good question. Thank you.
Yeah, Adam, Prabhu, I will send you a document we have where it's very clearly defined, like what do we do practically and how do we approach such situations, especially when we are grieving or trying to help a person who is grieving.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Mukunda Prabhu, I was just remembering this one thing from, the session Ramboru Mataji had when right after the Bhakticharya Maharaj's departure. So one thing Mataji was mentioning is just be there and let the person express whatever it is. You know, I could personally feel myself asking all these questions and, you know, so much of that negative emotions about Krishna and about the whole situation, why it has to happen. But just being in that session and just able to freely express, somebody is there. It actually, you know, helped my heart to grieve so much better. And in that process, I also had so much of, you know, felt so much connection with Rambaru Mataji just by, you know, just being there. So what else do you feel? So what else you're having? What questions? You know, just by being there and asking those questions. So probably Adam, Prabhu, that's one thing. I mean, yes, definitely spiritual side is there. But in that heat of the moment, especially if that person is not inclined, as Mukunda Prabhu was mentioning, it may seem very hard, sometimes this spiritual message. So just being there and let them express their grief, whatever it is. So that itself can ease in their heart. And because we are carrying Krishna in our heart, that can touch and make them closer to Krishna, even though externally, even if we don't do anything.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mataji.
Yes, this document that I'm talking about is very practical. It also suggests that exact same thing, that you don't necessarily start preaching philosophy at that time. It's a document that His Holiness Ramapad Maharaj had given. So if anybody else also wants it, I can share that. Let me know.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
very
Prabhu.
helpful
Maybe you could.
advice, Mataji.
Yeah, thank you. Pratibahu Prabhu, if it is shareable across the congregation, probably that would be very useful, I think. Because until I attended Rambaru Mataji's session, I didn't even know. I was actually thinking I'm supposed to be a devotee and I should not be grieving all this. You know, I didn't even know. So it might be very helpful. Please share, Prabhu. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I do have one quick question for you all while you're here. If anybody can answer this for me, because I don't know this myself, but I'm curious because Ashwatthama, you know, he was dishonored by, you know, he was punished by Arjuna and the Pandavas for his sin of killing their sons. And then again, he's attacking with another. He's going to be in this chapter. Sorry, spoiler alert. He will be attacking again with another Brahmastra. So I'm trying to understand. I feel like I vaguely have heard like something about the fate of Ashwatthama, that he was somehow punished for this again, but I don't know for sure. Does anybody know about that or where that might be? I was trying to look in the Mahabharata by Krishna Dharma Prabhu, but I couldn't find it either there. So I was curious.
In which chapter? In Queen Kunti's prayers in that chapter?
Yeah, because here this is Queen Kunti's prayers chapter that we just started today, and later on in this chapter, it's the same Ashwatthama that's sending another Brahmastra to kill you know, Parikshit Maharaj in the womb of Uttara, and it stopped. But I'm just curious, like it's just interesting to me that after having been dealt with, we're seeing that he's coming back again.
Hare Krishna, Mukunda Prabhu.
Yes, Mataji. Yeah.
What I remember when I was reading and listening to other seniors, etc., about this topic is when Ashwatthama released the first Brahmastra, he could not retract it. Vyasadeva was present in that group of sadhus at that bank of, I don't remember the lake or river, but he was disguised in that group, right? He was hiding in that group and he couldn't do anything. And That's when he released first Brahmastra, right?
Okay.
It's the same Brahmastra. Since he could not retract, he, instead of um, he knows Arjuna's Brahmastra is going to mix with that, and then that is going to be retracted, right? But he routed already. So he routed to different person, which is Parikshit Maharaj in this case. So that's already done before his punishment. That is my understanding, but I haven't read. According to, I remember who is, I think Sri Vallabha Prabhu was explaining the other Saturday, right? He was explaining, right? So Arjuna released his Brahmastra to normalize the other Brahmastra, and then he could retract both at the same time.
Right.
But even that before happened, the first Brahmastra routed to Uttara's womb. So that is my understanding. Because after removing the jewel from his head, after the punishment, he does not have any powers, right? That is my understand. I don't know.
I would have to hear. I mean, if you have a source that backs that, I would be interested in seeing, because it doesn't seem that way. It seems like Arjuna retracts both of the Brahmastras, and then Ashwatthama is punished, and then he sends another Brahmastra. And it reads very clearly like that in the Bhagavatam, at least. So
which verse was it, Prabhuji? I want to read and understand that as well.
Which verse?
Mm-hmm.
Which verse? You're saying which verse is it that he sends?
Verse did he release the second Brahmastra?
It says it's coming in this chapter. It's later.
Okay,
I think 1:8:10 onwards.
Oh, okay.
I have found something on that lines, Mukunda Prabhu, in Burijan Prabhu's Unveiling Lotus Feet.
Okay.
I can just read it, just one paragraph.
Yeah.
Sometimes, okay, so it says, after having been shamed and driven from the Pandava camp, Ashwatthama had sought revenge and unleashed 2 more Brahmastras. This time, he had targeted the 5 Pandavas as well as the youngest member of their dynasty, the future Pandava emperor still lying unborn in Uttara's womb. Sometimes one wonders how, after everything Ashwatthama had suffered, he still had the power to send Brahmastras. But one should note that although he had lost both his power and his effulgence, neither his knowledge nor his memory were affected. Obviously, neither was his hatred for the Pandavas. Ultimately, Ashwatthama shooting these additional Brahmastras, as well as the fact that he was later given the benediction to become one of the 7 great sages in the next Manvantara, indicate that everything that took place after the Kurukshetra war was Krishna's pastime. Krishna's pastimes proceed only according to his desire and simply for his pleasure. And participants in those pastimes are suitably empowered to play their respective roles.
Wow, that is amazing.
I know. I appreciate Prabhu's explanation so wonderfully. And you are right, Prabhu. I think Vrindavan Prabhu was explaining on those verses that Arjuna actually retracted both of them. He actually made into one when he released his, and then he retracted both of them.
Yeah.
And I think one more thing is, after this incident, he actually goes on to perform like many austerities, and that actually, counteracted at least the sinful activities that he had done. And then I think he goes on to become the great sage, and he'll be the next Vyasadeva, I think, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for clarifying that. That was really helpful.
Yeah, there's no reference of him doing austerities. I would be interested in knowing. I know that the reference is that he lives a very long life for thousands of years. And it is an assumption that in those thousands of years, he realizes and he goes through different, not just austerity, but also devotional service, because it's not possible that you become one of the 7 sages in your next life. without. So
Yeah.
I was hearing one Maharaj on that, and that's what comes to my mind.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because that's always confused me also, especially considering just the atrocity that Ashwatthama committed twice. So this is very good to understand. Thank you. Okay. If there's anything else, otherwise we can stop there, I think. Okay. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.